You found us! Welcome to Author Quick Draw. This is your permission slip to take a quick break from the hecticness of your newsfeed and hang out with me, Annie Bucknell, freelance feature writer and women's fiction author, as I get to spend some time playing Pictionary, giving away prizes and having fun with some of Australia's best loved authors. Now, we know that your favourite authors can tell incredible page-turning stories, but can they draw? We're about to find out live now in 3, 2, 1, go. Hello everybody, and a big welcome to our guest tonight, Sandie Docker.
Hi Annie, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to be talking to you, and I cannot wait to tell everybody about your novel. Guys, if you can hear us loud and clear and the stream's coming through, just give us a thumbs up. And you know what? Give us a comment and tell us where you're watching from tonight. I'm talking to you from Brisbane, and Sandie, I believe you're talking to us from Sydney. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, and we're in that lovely daylight saving, so wherever you're watching, it's probably a different time to us Queenslanders at the moment. But we are just getting into summer, which is a perfect time to read Sandie's next novel, which is called The Banksia Bay Beach Shack. And it is just the perfect introduction into summertime. It's set in the 60s and in contemporary day as well, which I love those dual timeline books, and covers some incredible history of Australian history that you may or may not be familiar with, but it just brings it to life and makes it really personal. It's got love, it's got loss, it's got romance, it's got mystery. It really has it all. It's Sandie's third novel, and I am going to be working my way through her backlist. I cannot believe I haven't found your books yet, Sandie. You're a great new find for me, so thank you so much for writing this.
Oh, that's okay. I haven't been around that long. My first novel only came out in 2018, so I'm still quite new on the scene, which maybe is why you haven't found me yet.
You're new but prolific. If you guys are familiar with Sandie, you might, you follow her on Facebook. If you don't, you need to go and follow her on Facebook and Instagram and those ones. But she actually has a chat, a weekly chat like me. She has her own little show called Friday Book Bites, where she interviews some really, really cool authors each week. So, and you get, you've spoken to some amazing Australian authors.
Yeah, I have. It's one of the things that I love. That's kind of a side effect of the job, I guess. The job is writing books and getting it out there into readers' hands. But the side effect of it is that you get to meet a lot of other Australian authors, and it's a wonderfully supportive community. And so I have met in person a lot of those people that I have interviewed on Friday Book Bites, or, through the wonderful medium of social media. And we're all just so happy to be talking about books. And I've had some pretty cool guests on so far.
Yeah, you definitely have. Well, I am honoured to flip the table on you tonight and have you as my wonderful guest for Author Quick Draw. So how this is going to work, guys, from home is Sandie is going to be drawing her favourite movie, and I'm going to distract her with some questions. And then when she's finished, we're going to hold it up and pan it across the screen, and the first person to guess correctly will win a copy of The Banksia Bay Beach Shack. And I can't. Let's get talking about this book, and you can start drawing now if you like.
Okay, I'm hoping it doesn't end up like this. We'll see how it goes. You'll
be good, and if not, I'm good at bluffing for time if we need it to, so we're all good. Sorry, this particular book, as I said, it's set in a beachside setting, so it's a really small village feel. It's really beautiful. It just takes you right back in your head to those sort of settings. I was reading that you actually grew up in Coffs Harbour, so I'm just wondering how much of that inspiration you actually took from your own childhood.
Yeah, I grew up in Coffs Harbour back when there was only about 25,000 people living there. It's a much bigger place now, and my mum still lives in Coffs, so I still actually call it home, even though I haven't lived there since I was 17. I still refer to it as home all the time. And it's a really good question to ask, because the very first spark of an idea that I had for the Banksia Bay Beach Shack actually came one Christmas holidays when my husband and daughter and I were up there. For Christmas one year, a few years ago now, and I was walking along the beach there, as you do, and it had rained recently, and I had that sense of the cold sand seeping through my bare feet, and it threw me back to a memory of, I guess I must have been in my mid to late teens, sitting on sand after it had rained, and the sand gets really, really cold. And I had this flash of a scene, and it was the scene that would become, and this isn't a spoiler, so it's okay to say, Laura sitting under the jetty when the storm rolled in. And that was the first scene in my head, and it came from that trip to Coffs Harbour.
Because that storm is a very powerful turning point in the novel for the characters as well. So obviously you kind of got that feeling when you had that scene, and you come into your head that you had something there. How long ago did you have the inspiration versus when you started writing, out of curiosity?
I'm trying to think which Christmas it was that we went home for that.
Sorry, testing your memory.
I know, and at my age, that's not a good thing. It would have been a couple of years ago, possibly around 2018, that we had that trip, and it wasn't until last year that I actually wrote the story. So it had been sitting in my head for a while, that one scene, and yeah, I just kind of grew from there.
There you go, writers. Everything is inspiration and fodder for future novels. So don't throw out any scenes that kind of pop into your head. So one of the things about this book is that it has such a nostalgic feel. So a big element of it is, this small beachside town in the 60s, and there, you don't hold back in terms of diving into the racial tension. In this particular instance, the racial tension with the Greek community. Now, growing up, I actually had heard a lot about that. Oh yes, from my parents that there used to be a lot of racism towards Greeks and Italians in Australia. And they kind of described some things to me that they had seen happen and witnessed and things like that. But I hadn't actually had anything to give me that, almost that first-hand account, or really take me into that experience. And in this book, the character of Costas really takes us into what it was like for young people growing up in the 60s in Australia who were from, that immigrant community. So can you tell me how you came to actually write this storyline into the novel, and how Costas came about?
Yeah, Costas was a bit of a tricky one to figure out in the end. I knew when I started that his character had to be an outsider. For the scene where Lily and Gigi's relationship is torn apart, and again, I won't give any spoilers away, he had to be an outsider to the community for them to simply believe that he was the one that did the wrong thing. And I think if he was, even from out of Banksia Bay, if he was a white man, I think they still probably wouldn't have accepted it. He had to be a complete outsider. And so I was going through all sorts of ideas in my head. Would he be an Indigenous character? Would he be a migrant? Where would that lie? And I did a bit of research into where the migrants came from in that era, and that's how I landed on Costas being from a Greek family who had fled after World War II.
Yeah, and it was just so fascinating reading his experience. And like you said, he really was that outsider and was treated as such. There's some echoes there, I feel, of, really of an Australia that sometimes isn't as welcoming to people from outside their community, whether that be immigrants or even just the way that Laura is sort of treated coming in from the outside as well as a reporter. So I guess, I kind of wonder, in writing this, did you feel that there were any lessons for us here in a modern Australia to investigate and to examine?
Yeah, I think one of the things is that we haven't come as far as we think we have in that time. It actually wasn't that long ago, the 1960s, where Costas's story is set. And we think that we're a completely enlightened society now, and those things don't happen anymore. And they absolutely do. And I think it's a useful thing to be reminded of, that these things do still happen today. And the other thing that I find really interesting is if you speak to anyone today in Australia and say to them, imagine Australian life without the Greeks and Italians in it. We couldn't do it. We could not imagine Australia without the Greek and Italian population here, and everything that they brought with them. And I think it just goes to show that, if we do open ourselves to these different cultures and nationalities, we just don't know what's going to happen. And in 20 years or 30 years time from now, the cultures that are perhaps experiencing this lack of acceptance will be so much a part of the fabric of our society that we'll look back and we'll go, really? We felt that way 20 years ago? So yeah, history does repeat.
It does, sadly, sorry, in those circumstances, but it was just such a fascinating insight into that particular issue in that era. And you know, you like even just examining the 60s, this Australian beach setting in the 60s, like I just felt like I was stepping into a movie almost, you know, and the way that people are called Old Salty, and it was such an atmospheric book. Like if you need to kickstart your summer, guys, in the warmer weather, like in Queensland, I read a lot of this in my hammock, by the way, which was really nice outside in the sun while my son was playing, and like I literally could have been at the beach if I just closed my eyes. So yeah, it is a really atmospheric book, and it has that just that nostalgic vibe. It will transport you. One of the other things that you that you kind of examine in your book, so they are that contemporary rural fiction, maybe even women's fiction, but you don't shy away from the idea that love and pain and love and loss are sometimes twin bedfellows. You know, can you tell me what it is that kind of draws you to write about the hard side of love, of the flip side of love, in terms of, you know, examining loss?
I think because you can't have one without the other. You know, once you get past the age of about 12, you're going to experience things in life that result in heartache or that sense of grief or any of those not so pleasant emotions. And it shows us the balance that we need in life, that, you know, with these hard things, we can also experience the good. And I think it is something that every adult can relate to. We've all lost somebody or had our heart broken at some point in our life. And I think it's really important that fiction mirrors real life in that respect, because it makes the characters relatable. It makes the stories relatable. You know, I often say that I can't imagine, that's why I love women's fiction so much, because we can do it in our genre, explore those deeper issues. You know, I can't imagine what it's like to be a CIA agent, you know, saving the president, or heading off into space and saving the universe from a meteorite. I can't relate to that as a person. I can relate to losing a loved one, or having my heart broken, or life not working out the way I thought it was going to. And I think that's where the beauty of a genre like women's fiction is.
Yeah, actually, I relate to that. I write women's fiction myself, and I love to read fantasy and I love to read sci-fi, but what draws me to the page is exploring real life women's experiences and our lived experiences of, like you said, love and loss, and you know, especially even examining what it looked like through the ages. The 60s wasn't that long ago. You know, like my mum is a child of the 60s, so we're talking really one generation back for me. You know, she would have been a very young child in the 60s, but still, like, it's just it's really not a stretch. But the further we go in our own our own journey, it just feels a lot further back than it really is. And I think that's the power of fiction, is almost that time travel, of that connection between generations, and, you know, and to our past.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. It's fun as a writer to be able to time travel like that, but I think it's really interesting for readers as well. And I had quite a few readers who did grow up in the 60s write to me and say that, you know, I nailed that vibe of the 60s beachside community. And I'm a child of the 70s, so, you know, I'm a fair bit older than you, Annie, and it's even less in my past than it is in yours, but it can feel like a world away. And I think the power that we have as writers is to be able to connect those two timelines and have our readers connect with them as well.
Yeah, and then through that, you know, and that's what I love about the multi-genre, like the multi-timeline books, is that, you know, you're often connecting grandmothers' experiences with granddaughters, and, you know, like, and a lot of us struggle to understand where our grandparents were coming from with some of the decisions that they made in their lives. And, you know, it's things like this that help us really get inside and understand the limitations of women back then, the limitations on not just women, on you know, different parts of communities and all those sorts of things. And I guess reading just breeds empathy, doesn't it? That's what it does.
Absolutely. And there have been scientific studies to prove that. You know, I've got a 14-year-old daughter now who, you know, more often than not will roll her eyes at me and my experiences, but she can't understand her grandparents at all. and where they're coming from and why they might hold certain views that they have. And I try to explain to her, you know, they grew up in a different era. It wasn't like that then. But of course, she doesn't want to listen to me tell her that. I'm her mother. What would I know? But when she's a little bit older and is hopefully reading this style of novel, that might help her bridge that gap in her experience and knowledge.
It's kind of special knowing that one day your daughter's going to age up into reading your books. That's a cool
I
feeling.
hope she does. At the moment,
She
she might be forced to. At the moment, though, she's into, we just bought the new Rick Riordan Trials of Apollo novel. So that's the kind of reading that she's into at the moment. But maybe one day, maybe.
Yeah, not quite this speed yet, but like, you know, give her a few years maybe. What about you? What are your favourite kinds of books to read? What do you enjoy getting into for leisure?
I will read just about any genre going except for horror. I can't do horror, and that's not because of the genre. It's because I'm the biggest scaredy cat you've ever met in
Me too.
your life.
Yes.
And so if I read a horror book, I wouldn't sleep for a year.
Yeah.
I just,
and then I'll
I
dream
can't,
about it and I'm just haunted.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Can't have those images in my head. So I don't read those. Obviously, I read a lot within the women's fiction genre, and I also read a lot of historical. I've just started getting into some of the Australian crime novels because we've got some fantastic.
They're good.
Fantastic.
Oh, yes. I'm reading Scrublands at the moment, and that's really good. Oh, there's so Australian crime is brilliant.
It really is. I recently read Carl Perry's novel, and that was, you know, a fantastic read. I have Petronella McGovern's new book ready to go on my side table. And I love the Australian authors. We've got so much talent here, and not just within my own genre, but across the whole range of fiction. You know, we've got Cassie Hamer, Petronella, who I've mentioned, Joanna Nell, Josephine Moon, Tabitha Bird, Monica McInerney, Leanne Kelsall. There's just so many fantastic Australian books out there. If I could turn my camera around, and I won't because my library's in a massive mess, but I have piles and piles and piles of books there ready for me to attack them.
Yeah, that's kind of my situation too. And probably a lot of you at home have the book pile. It's intimidating, but isn't it so satisfying when you start whittling through it and then you're like, oh, I can get more books. But anyway, that's sort of how it works. How are you going with your drawing, Sandie?
Well, look, it's done. I did warn everybody beforehand that I can't even draw stick figures. So all the best to your viewers if they can make it.
That's all right. We're good. We're very talented at interpreting pictures. All right. So if you want to hold it up and pan it across, and we'll see what we've got.
Oh. Should I come out a bit? Is that all right?
All right. Yeah. Go right into the tape. Okay. Go back. There's pages in. Yep. Okay. Go back in. So we just want to get that people in. Yep. And just a little bit to maybe your right. Yeah, I think that's it. Oh, the water. Oh, all right. Okay. There'll be some guesses coming in soon. I think I might have an idea, but I don't want to win because I've already read this one.
You've already read the book. You don't need to win it again.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Okay, we've got Neen Cohen, Love Letter. Can you give us a genre?
I don't know if it would be called a chick flick, maybe.
Okay. All right.
It's very,
how far back was it?
A few years ago now. It's very popular at a certain time of year. There's a cryptic clue for you. And it has a huge cast. Whoops, that way.
Okay, the next guess was from D.A. Kelly, The Notebook.
No. This is just one scene.
Oh my gosh.
It's one scene from the movie.
It is like everybody's favorite Christmas movie, guys. I know exactly what you're talking about. That's the best scene. Okay.
Someone's got it.
Jen McCusker might have it. Love Actually. Good
That's
work,
it.
Jem. That
Colin
is fun,
Firth. You
actually,
can't
isn't
go
it?
past Colin Firth jumping into a lake
How
in
awesome
any
is that?
movie.
That is true. That is very true. He's very good in Pride and Prejudice too. But you know what? I do think that you know, Hugh, not his name's not Hugh Jackman. The guy who plays
Hugh Grant.
the Prime Minister.
Hugh
That's
Grant.
it. Him dancing through the, through Downing Street's pretty good too.
That was the other scene I was thinking of drawing, but I didn't know how to do it. So.
Oh yeah, how would you draw that? No, that was perfect. You did really well drawing love, actually. You picked a tough one. Well done. Well done. Yeah, Tracy Anderson says that was a tough one. She's guessed a few of them, so that you did awesome. There's a few comments I just wanted to kind of go back over before we go to some questions from the writing community. Sure. Lots of people joining in, watching from around Australia. Tracy Anderson says she's just gotten her first introduction to you thanks to Friday Book Bites, which is how I found you too. So guys, like, this sort of stuff does actually help, writers get their names out there. So if you're liking and enjoying an episode that someone's doing, feel free, to share it. It really does help authors find readers. That's how I found Sandie. That's how Tracy found Sandie. And we're very grateful to have found Sandie because she's awesome. Yvonne Lockhurst says, I've read and loved all of Sandie's books. Caroline Ann says she's really keen to read this. You should, Caroline. It's awesome. Neen's also really keen to read it, so it sounds very insightful, which it is. And guys, you're gonna have to go order it from Booktopia. Please don't order from Amazon. But
yes.
support a local Aussie business at the same time. Jem wants to know if you've read Dervla McTiernan in terms of crime, because she's wonderful.
I haven't. I have 2 of her books in my piles. And I actually met her last year at one of her talks. She was doing, I think it was the Dimmicks luncheon that she had in Sydney last year, and she was such a delight, and that was a real thrill. So it is signed and ready to go. I've just got to set aside some time.
I do think we're going to get comments now from Jem about how you need to read this next. She's a Dervla super fan. Rightly so, because she's very, very good.
Yeah.
Leanne Hodge wants to know, QBD has it. There we go. Get onto QBD. Leanne Hodge wants to know, what books did you read as a child? This is a nice question.
That's a really interesting question, Leanne, because, and it's probably sacrilegious to admit this, I didn't enjoy reading as a child. I know. And I would actually go so far as to say I hated reading as a child.
Wow. Okay, so how did Sandie Docker, the author, happen?
Quite by accident. I was one of those kids that was always outside playing sport. And my sister loved to read, and anything my sister loved, I automatically hated, because that's what you do with sisters. And so I never really engaged with it. And even to this day, I haven't actually finished my HSC texts that I was supposed to read for year 12.
Oh, that's
so, well, yeah, they're not usually the most inspiring texts, are they? So yeah, I came to reading very, very late. My father, who is sadly no longer with us and did not get to see me published, which is heartbreaking for me.
That's hard.
He was a massive reader. He would read everything that you could get your hands on, and I think he kept the secondhand bookshop in Coffs Harbour alive. When I was young, and I worshipped him. And when I was in my late teens, he handed me a fantasy novel, which was Pawn of Prophecy by David Eddings. David Eddings was, I should say, a massive writer in the fantasy world. And my dad gave that.
He's huge.
Yeah, he gave that to me, and he said, Sandie, just give it a try. Just see what you think. And I wanted to please my father, like most daughters do. And I started reading this novel, and I was 3 chapters in, and I knew my life was never going to be the same. I couldn't believe that I had missed out on this, up until then, that a book could transport you, mind, body, and soul, to another place, that those characters could become so real to you that you thought of them as friends. And, now 30 years later, I can actually still picture scenes from that book so vividly in my head. And that was where I started reading. And I read every fantasy novel I could get my hands on after that, and read all of the greats, Terry Goodkind and Raymond E. Feist and Sarah Douglas, all those fantastic fantasy writers. And then when I was doing the HSC, even though I wasn't reading, I could write a really mean essay. And so I was in the top level English class and we had to study Jane Austen. And that was when I found my way into women's fiction. So, yeah.
Jane Austen is a pretty good introduction to women's fiction. Like, if you're going to be introduced to it, like, she's the person to do it for you. But you know what I love about that story, Sandie? It's kind of special. Most people don't remember the first novel they read and loved.
Yeah.
Do you know? Like, a lot of people might remember novels that they loved as a child and stuff, but not many of us have a memory of, like, this book being handed to us and going, wow, life is never going to be the same. So that's kind of special, too, that you've got that and that connection to your dad as well. Lots of people loving your book recommendations and your list of sci-fi stories as well, by the way. And Leanne Hodge, who asked the question, said, hilarious but great to hear, trying to impart this to my students. You may not be a reader or writer yet, but it's possible you just need the right book that speaks to you, which is so true. Oftentimes it's not, I think that's not the book that's the issue. Yeah, it's not, so it's not the reader that's the issue, it's the material.
Yeah, you just have to find the right one. And that's why, you know, I get so cranky with people that say, oh, my child only reads, and it might be graphic novels or Marvel comics or, you know, and they say it like that, like that's a bad thing. And I'm like, as long as they're reading, it doesn't matter. They will find their path eventually. We all do. And, you know, if I can find my path to being an author, having not been a reader as a child, you know, it is exactly as Leanne said, finding that right book at the right time, and boom, your world opens.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. You know, like I did an article with Mindful Parenting a few issues back about encouraging reading at all different ages and what you needed to do to get kids reading. And I spoke to a top literary expert in Australia about that. And she was echoing that exact same thing. Like, you know, if you've got a child that's a reluctant reader, like, but they're interested in manga or whatever, like, get them reading that. Even getting your kids to sit there and make up a bedtime story, you're actually engaging those reading muscles, whether you know it or not. It's all about, you know, our imagination, our creativity, and our connection to each other is through storytelling. So, you know, she was sort of saying, like, broaden your idea of what reading is to include story of all kind, and then you'll have a reader. And I thought that's really powerful.
It really is. And children have the most amazing imaginations, far better than we do, because they're not tainted yet by the world and by being told, you know, you can't think like that. So engaging in that imagination in whatever way it happens, even if it's building plasticine models and telling a story out of those, you know, storytelling is storytelling, whichever medium that you're using, and, you know, they will eventually find it.
Yes, and they might turn out to be a best-selling Australian author. You just never know.
You never know.
You'd never do you? So some questions from our writing community, because, you know, like, we like to hear about how writers came to publication, those sorts of things. You know, and we know that you do the Friday book bites where you're meeting lots of interesting authors. You may have met them before and you're inviting them back on. I just want to know, like, you came to publication, I was reading, you had a little bit of a long journey to get there, or an interesting journey to get there. And one of the ways you came there was you found the right person at the right time who fell in love with your work. So can you tell, you know, our emerging authors and our aspiring writers out there what you think the benefit is to networking and how you do that as a beginner?
It's really hard to do as a beginner because you never feel like you belong in that space. And I probably still don't feel like I belong in that space. It's called the imposter syndrome.
How many books do you need? Yeah.
Well, apparently a few more, because I know Hannah Ritchell was talking the other day about how she's really worried about her next book. And I mean, that's Hannah Ritchell. So.
Hannah Ritchell?
Yes, Hannah Ritchell.
There's no hope for any of us, is there?
There's no hope at all. But as a beginner, it is really hard to connect with the writing community, particularly with published writers, because you are so afraid to do it. But my advice would be, don't be afraid, because it's one of the most supportive and open and friendly communities that I've ever known. Monica McInerney was spruiking books through lockdown, And she reached out to Penguin, that's her publisher, is my publisher as well, and said, what can I do to help these authors whose books came out in lockdown? And that's Monica McInerney, who is massive, but she wanted to do something to help people. And so she was spruiking my book and a whole bunch of other people's as well. So that, you know, it is the most friendly group that you could ever imagine. So the first tip would be, don't be afraid. The worst thing that can happen is you won't get an answer if you reach out to someone. You know, they're not going to tell you off.
It's okay.
Yeah, and that's fine. You know, when you're on submission, that happens a lot. Reach out, and it really is important to find those networks. I found mine through doing courses through the Australian Writers Centre.
Great.
Australian Writers Centre and Write New South Wales were the two places I did my courses through. And the great thing about those is that you're meeting other writers, and they're usually at the beginning of their journey like you are at the time, but you might also connect with the teacher of the course as well. And so that's where I started, and that's where I found a wonderful writing group to belong to, where I made some industry contacts. And when I say industry contacts, I'm not talking about, hi, I'm Sandie, nice to meet you, here's my manuscript. It doesn't work like that.
We can't do that?
No, we can't slip our manuscripts under the toilet door either. No accosting them in the bathrooms or anything like that. But having that contact, what I found for me was learning about the industry through these people, you know, and the more you know about the industry, the better off you're going to be when that break finally does come and you look like you actually know what you're talking about, even if you're only bluffing your way through. And make as many of those contacts as you can, because you never know where they're going to lead. You know, some of those contacts are people that I've had on Friday Book Bites now. And, you know, one of those contacts was somebody I became friend with who was a very established writer. And it was them who got my manuscript in front of the publisher at Penguin, who fell in love with it. And it really is about timing as well. There's a lot of luck involved. But
isn't it? Yes. Yeah.
Penguin had turned me down. You know,
wow. But that's, you found the right person at the right time who was just like, this is what I've been looking for. But they weren't necessarily looking for it earlier. They weren't here earlier. They came out from England. Oh, there you go. So, and you never know where these friendships are going to lead to. And particularly on social media, it's easy to reach out to authors and other industry professionals through social media and follow them, interact with them, be as genuine as you can with them. And you never know what's going to happen. But the support is amazing. If you take that brave step to create those contacts within the industry, the support is unbelievable. Absolutely. And I think one of the key things you said there was, and I think that this is sort of the same, people get the dirty word about marketing, and networking and marketing are just dirty words. People get really icky about them. But the thing that you just said that I found really interesting was that these friendships, you don't know where they're going to take you. And that's what networking is, guys. It's just being friendly. It is just developing friendships, or even just, you know, being nice. You know, authors, when they go onto social media and they post something out, they sometimes feel like they're shouting out into the void. So if you've got an author that you love and you go and you put a comment, like, trust me, they appreciate it. It helps them. It helps boost them in, you know, the algorithms or whatever. But it's part of their job to actually put their stuff out there and put themselves in front of you. So if you're interacting back with them, that actually is networking. You just don't realize that you're doing it. Absolutely. And you're right. You know, we often put stuff out there and we don't know if anyone's looking at it, reading it, you know, enjoying it. And we're human too, you know. When I have readers, you know, send me a message to say they fell in love with a character, or they loved the book, or it meant something to them on a personal level, that makes my day. You know, it really makes my day. And you and I have met through social media. That's how you and I have met. Indeed. And yeah, exactly. And so you do your own show with the Friday Book Bites. Can you tell people who might be thinking, oh, maybe I actually want to get into some video content, like, you know, even authors that are thinking, okay, what do I do in this new world? How do I reach out? What are some key things that you've learned about creating video?
Yeah, Book Bites came about because of the pandemic. The Banksia Bay Beach Shack came out the week that everything started to get shut down. So all of my author events were cancelled, and we were all in a mad scramble in those first few weeks, to figure out what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And my publicist, who's young and savvy, was all over it. And she's like, right, well, you're going to start a YouTube channel and you're going to get StreamYard and you're going to do this and you're going to do that. And I was just like, not me. I can't do any of that. And
really, you're so comfortable in front of the camera.
Very steep learning curve, Annie. Very steep. And it's very handy that I have a computer engineer as a husband. So
that helps.
That helps. But we were forced to find different ways to connect with our readers because we couldn't do our events in person anymore. And so I'd been thinking about how I was going to do that. And of course, so we all had our launches online, and I had a live Facebook launch. And there were talks through, the bookshops and the libraries and those sorts of things. But I wanted to do something that was just a little bit different. If I was going to take up some room in this space, I wanted it to be a little bit different. So I naively called it, when I first started, 15-minute Fridays, because I thought we'll have a quick 15-minute chat about books. And I can see 15 minutes is never going to work when you're talking about books. So when
I pitched it to authors too, I was like, oh, it's just gonna be a 15-minute chat, and by 2 episodes I was like, these are not 15-minute chats.
We can't stop. When we start talking about books, we just can't stop. So I very quickly changed it to Friday Book Bites, and then I was not limited to how long I took. And we don't necessarily talk about the books that the author has written. We talk about either a theme or a process or something like that. And it takes a lot longer than you think it does to get these things set up. Live, I don't know why on earth I thought doing them live was going to be a good idea, because if something goes wrong, you can't fix it in the middle of the chat.
Yes.
So that scares me. So make sure you do have some knowledge going into it, or some practice before you go into it, so that you're a little bit savvy with the technology. I actually do know why I made it live. I did it live because I popped in one Friday, and I can't even remember what I did. I might have shown a book that I'd bought, or it was something, I can't remember now what I did, just randomly, live. And somebody wrote, oh, thank you for dropping into my lunchtime. And that was when I had the idea that, with us all stuck at home, seeing the same faces every day of your husband and your child, and that's about it, we might need something a little bit different. And so I thought I'll do a live chat on Fridays at lunchtime. People can just pop in, see a different face, hear a different voice, and then pop out again. So, do your research, and it is worth it, though, as much as we talk about how much time and effort goes into it. And of course, I should be editing instead of hanging around on Facebook. But it's worth
fun,
it.
Right?
It's so much fun. The people that I've spoken to, I'll be up to episode 20 tomorrow, and
well done.
Yeah, and so it's really exciting. It's fun, book people talking about books. What more is there in life?
Pretty much. I mean, what author doesn't love to? And you know what? Before I was seriously writing, I would watch those. There was a show on the ABC where they would interview authors, and I would just watch as many of those as possible. Inside the Actors Studio, anything that talks about the craft of story. As a reader, I wanted to know how that all happened, and you just get such interesting information about how people come to write these tales. So that's really, really good advice. So I'm picking up, do your research, practice. StreamYard is a good tool as well, and don't be scared.
Yeah. It's an easy thing to say, though, isn't it? Don't be scared. I'm scared all the time.
Yeah, I know, but the practice kind of helps with the scare thing too. So so who's tomorrow's guest?
Tomorrow I have Frances Chapman, who is a young adult author who won the Ampersand Prize for her novel. And we're going to be talking about writing for a YA audience and genre snobbery.
Love it. Okay, great. I'll be tuning in. And what are you working on? What are you working on now, and where can people find you if they want to keep up to date?
Yeah, so I am editing my book for next year, which is the Wattle Island Book Club. And I have released the cover of that on my social media.
It's stunning.
It is beautiful, isn't it? All my covers are beautiful, though.
Yeah.
And I can say that because
Yeah. You
they're
must be in
not done
love
by
with
me.
it.
So,
Oh, they are so pretty.
yeah, the release date we're still playing with at the moment because, so many things have impacted this year. So once I've got a firm date, I'll let people know. So that's what I'm working on, madly editing that. And yeah, I'm on social media on Facebook, which is at Sandie Docker Writer, on Instagram at Sandie Docker, and my website is www.sandiedocker.com.
Wonderful. So go find Sandie. Go join tomorrow if you like this sort of stuff. If you haven't watched Friday Book Bites, which I know a lot of you do already. Next week, we're going to be chatting to Monique Mulligan about Wherever You Go. So it's another emotional women's fiction read. If you loved the Vanessa Carnevale one a few weeks back, guys, I think this might be your speed as well. So it's one of those grab the tissues kind of books, which I just love. That's my thing. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And if you are a book person who wants to chat more about books, we've started a Facebook group called the Reading a Revival. So feel free to jump in and request to be added to that. But otherwise, have a lovely end of your week. And Sandie, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everyone who joined us today.
Thanks, guys. It's about time for that cup now, don't you think? Thank you so much for joining me tonight, guys. I hope you had as much nerdy fun as I did chatting to some of our absolute favourite best-selling authors. You will never believe the people I have lined up for us in the next couple of weeks. So to make sure that you don't miss out on any of the fun or really any of the giveaways, be sure that you've liked and subscribed to my YouTube channel, Annie Bucknell, or like me on Facebook where we go live at 7:30 every Thursday night. You can also find me on Instagram at annie.bucknell where I share more of my daily life and my daily battle trying to write a novel and file freelance feature articles with a toddler in tow. It's good fun. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.